I was standing in my father's garage, holding the wrench he'd just handed me, when I realized I'd been performing the role of the perfect son for 30 years instead of actually being one. The moment of clarity hit me as Dad explained the intricacies of rebuilding a carburetor for the third time that afternoon. I wasn't listening because I cared about cars. I was nodding and pretending to understand because that's what sons were supposed to do with their fathers. Work with their hands. Share manly knowledge. Bond over tools and engines and things I'd never had any real interest in. "You getting this, Marcus?" Dad asked, looking up from the engine parts scattered across his workbench. "Yeah, absolutely," I lied, the same lie I'd been telling him since I was 12 years old. The truth was, I was 32, a successful graphic designer who'd rather be working on my art than pretending to care about automotive repair. But admitting that felt like betraying everything my father had tried to teach me about being a man, about being his son. I was Marcus Thompson, the dutiful son who showed up for every family gathering, helped with home repairs I was terrible at, and listened to Dad's stories about his construction days with what I hoped looked like genuine interest. On paper, I was the good son, respectful, present, carrying on family traditions. In reality, I was suffocating under the weight of his expectations and my own fear of disappointing him. The breaking point had been building for months. Mom's 60th birthday was coming up, and Dad had been planning this elaborate surprise party that required weeks of coordination. He'd naturally assumed I'd take the lead on organizing everything. "Man of the family has to step up," he'd said, even though my sister Lisa was infinitely better at event planning. But that's not how it worked in our family. I was the son, so I handled the important responsibilities. Lisa was the daughter, so she handled the supporting roles. It didn't matter that she was better suited for leadership or that I was drowning in work deadlines. Family hierarchy trumped individual strengths every time. "Your grandfather would be proud," Dad said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "3 generations of Thompson men who know how to work with their hands." I nodded and smiled, even though my grandfather had died when I was 8 and I barely remembered him. Even though I'd never felt proud of my mechanical abilities because I didn't have any. Even though the person Dad was proud of wasn't really me. It was the version of me he'd constructed based on what he thought sons should be. That night, driving home from another afternoon of pretending to enjoy guy time with my father, I finally admitted the truth that had been eating at me for years. I didn't know how to be his son without disappearing into his idea of what a son should be. And I was exhausted from the performance. The next few weeks became a masterclass in how to slowly lose yourself while trying to be the perfect son. The birthday party planning consumed every free moment I had, pulling me away from a freelance project I was passionate about. When I mentioned the time crunch to Dad, he said, "Family comes first, son. Work will always be there." The implication was clear. Good sons prioritize family obligations over personal pursuits, especially hobbies like art. When Mom asked if I was dating anyone, Dad jumped in with his usual commentary about settling down and giving them grandchildren. "Marcus needs to find a good woman and start thinking about his legacy," he said, as if my worth as a son was measured by my ability to continue the family line. The worst part was how everyone else saw our relationship. Friends would comment on how close Dad and I were, how nice it was that we spent so much time together. They saw the surface, the regular visits, the shared projects, the apparent bonding, without understanding that I felt like a stranger in my own family role. The breaking point came during a family dinner when Dad started talking about the family business again. He'd been dropping hints for years about me joining his construction company, taking over eventually, keeping the Thompson name on the trucks. "I'm not getting any younger," he said, looking directly at me. "It would mean a lot to have my son carrying on what I built." The silence around the table was deafening. Mom looked hopeful. Lisa looked sympathetic. She knew this wasn't what I wanted, but also knew she couldn't be the heir to Dad's masculine legacy. "Dad, I started, then stopped. How do you tell your father that his life's work holds no appeal for you? That the legacy he wants to pass down feels like a prison sentence? Think about it," he said, not waiting for my answer. "We could be partners. Father and son, building something together." I nodded and changed the subject, but the weight of his expectations felt heavier than ever. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing his projection of what a son should want, should value, should become. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by my artwork. Digital designs, paintings, creative projects that made me feel alive, and realized that none of it mattered to the most important man in my life. Not because Dad was malicious, but because it didn't fit his definition of masculine success. I was living a double life. The creative person I was when he wasn't around, and the dutiful son I performed when he was. And the performance was killing the real me. I think I'm disappointing my father by being myself, I confessed to my friend Jake over beers. And I'm disappointing myself by not being myself. Jake, who'd had his own struggles with family expectations, looked thoughtful. What does being a good son mean to you? I launched into my usual explanation about respect, responsibility, carrying on traditions, making my father proud. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. Marcus, that sounds like a job description, not a relationship. When do you feel most like yourself around your dad? I thought about it and realized the answer was never. I was always performing, always trying to be the son he wanted rather than the son I was. That's how I found myself in Dr. Kevin Rodriguez's office, a psychologist who specialized in men's family relationships and generational patterns. I'd found him through a desperate late-night search, how to be a good son without losing yourself. Dr. Rodriguez was different from what I'd expected. He was warm but direct, with an understanding of masculine pressure that felt immediately relatable. His office had books about male psychology, family systems, and healthy masculinity. Concepts I'd never thought to explore. Tell me about being a son, he said simply. I launched into my rehearsed story about wanting to honor my father, carry on traditions, be the man he'd raised me to be. Marcus, Dr. Rodriguez interrupted gently. You're describing performance, not relationship. What does being your father's son mean to you? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I want him to be proud of me. I want to live up to what he sacrificed to give me. That's understandable. But what about being proud of yourself? What about him knowing who you really are? I felt my throat tighten. What if who I really am isn't what he wants in a son? Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. I've been studying father-son relationships for 14 years, and I see this pattern constantly with men, especially those from traditional families. You've fallen into what we call the inheritance trap. He explained research from Princeton University that had followed 2,900 father-son relationships over 8 years. The father-son pairs who reported the strongest, most satisfying relationships weren't the ones where the son inherited his father's interests and career path. They were the ones where both men respected each other's individual identity while maintaining emotional connection. But don't good sons honor their father's legacy? There's a crucial difference between honoring your father and becoming your father, between respecting his values and adopting his life, between making him proud and making him comfortable. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a research summary. Many adult sons operate from what we call the legacy model. They believe love means carrying on their father's specific vision for their life. But the research shows that healthy father-son relationships operate from the authentic respect model, where both men honor each other's individual path while maintaining connection. My stomach dropped as I recognized myself completely. I've been trying to inherit his dreams instead of living my own. The legacy model creates resentful sons and controlling fathers. You're constantly managing your father's expectations while suppressing your own identity, and he becomes invested in your compliance rather than your happiness. But if I pursue my own path, won't I be disrespecting everything he's given me? Dr. Rodriguez smiled. Here's what the Princeton study found. Fathers whose adult sons pursued their authentic interests and maintained healthy boundaries reported higher long-term relationship satisfaction than fathers whose sons sacrificed their identity to meet expectations. He continued, healthy fathers want their sons to be successful and fulfilled, even if that looks different from what they imagined. Unhealthy family systems require conformity and inheritance to maintain the illusion of closeness. I thought about all the ways I'd hidden my real interests, all the dreams I'd set aside, all the parts of myself I'd suppressed to be the son he expected. I've been enabling his need to clone me by calling it respect. And how is that working for your relationship? Terribly. I was miserable. He was constantly pushing me toward a future I didn't want, and neither of us was getting to know the real me. Changing 30 years of people-pleasing patterns felt like learning to speak in my own voice after decades of ventriloquism. My first attempt was small but significant. Instead of automatically agreeing to help with Dad's weekend construction project, I said, "I can't make it this weekend. I have a gallery opening for a local artist I want to support." The pause on the phone was loaded with confusion and disappointment. "A gallery opening?" Dad asked, like I'd announced I was going to Mars. "Yeah, it's important to me. Maybe we can do something next weekend." It felt revolutionary and terrifying. I'd never prioritized my interests over his expectations, never claimed space for who I actually was. But breaking the inheritance pattern was harder than I'd expected. When Dad expressed concern that I was getting distracted from important things, my instinct was to overcompensate by offering to help with 2 projects instead of 1. When he mentioned how disappointed he was that I didn't seem interested in real work, I wanted to reassure him by showing up with tools and enthusiasm. Instead, I held my ground and sat with his discomfort and my own guilt. The real test came when I finally decided to tell him about my art. I'd been hiding my creative work for years, treating it like a shameful secret instead of a core part of who I was. I invited him to coffee, neutral territory away from the garage and the tools and the constant reminders of who he expected me to be. "Dad, I want to share something with you that's important to me," I said, pulling out my portfolio. He looked puzzled as I opened to my first piece, a digital design I'd created for a non-profit environmental campaign. "I've been doing graphic design work for several years now," I said. "It's not just a hobby. It's what I'm passionate about, what I'm good at, what I want to build my career around." Dad studied the images, his expression unreadable. "This is art. It's graphic design, visual communication. I help organizations tell their stories, create impact through imagery and design." "And people pay you for this?" "Yes. Actually, I make more from my freelance design work than I ever could in construction." The conversation that followed was everything I'd feared and needed. Dad was confused, worried about my financial stability, concerned that I was wasting my education on something that didn't seem like real work to him. But I didn't apologize for my passion. I didn't minimize my success. I didn't agree to consider construction as a backup plan. For the first time in my adult life, I stood firm in my own identity as his son. "I know this isn't what you imagined for me," I said, "but this is who I am. This is what makes me feel alive and successful. I hope you can be proud of me for being good at something, even if it's not what you're good at." 8 months later, sitting in Dad's living room looking at a framed print of one of my designs hanging on his wall, our relationship looked completely different. Not perfect. We still had moments of misunderstanding, still had to navigate his adjustment to who I actually was. But we'd learned to love each other without me disappearing in the process. The change hadn't happened overnight. Dad went through his own process of grief, mourning the son he'd imagined, adjusting to the son he actually had. There were moments of tension, conversations where he still pushed for me to consider more stable work, times when he seemed confused by my choices. But gradually, something beautiful began to emerge. When he realized I wasn't going to become his clone, he started to get curious about who I actually was. He began asking about my projects, my clients, my creative process, not to judge or change, but out of genuine interest in his son's life. The turning point came when I landed a major contract with a national nonprofit, creating an entire visual campaign around environmental conservation. When I told Dad about it, he was quiet for a long moment. "How much did you say they're paying you for this?" he asked. I told him the figure, and his eyebrows shot up. "For making pictures? For visual storytelling that helps them raise awareness and funding for their mission." Dad nodded slowly. "Well, I'll be damned. You found a way to make good money doing something you love." It wasn't the validation I'd expected, but it was the beginning of respect. The most profound change was in how we related to each other. Instead of me being the dutiful son who carried on his legacy, we became 2 men who chose to know and support each other. He started sharing his own dreams and regrets instead of just projecting them onto me. I started offering my perspective and skills instead of just receiving his instruction. We became father and son by choice rather than by performance. You know, Dad said during one of our coffee meetings, a new tradition we'd started. I used to worry that you didn't have any drive, any ambition. And now I see you've got plenty of drive. You just pointed it in a different direction than I would have. He paused, looking at his hands, the same hands that had taught me to hold tools I'd never used professionally. I'm proud of you, son. Not because you're like me, but because you're good at being you. It was the first time he'd said he was proud of me for being myself rather than for meeting his expectations. One evening, as I was showing him the latest campaign I designed, he asked something that surprised me. Do you think you could teach me some of this computer stuff? I might want to update the company's logo, make it look more professional. The request was small, but the significance was enormous. My father, the man who'd spent years trying to pull me into his world, was asking to learn about mine. As I opened my laptop and started showing him basic design principles, I thought about all the sons out there who might be struggling the way I had. Caught between love and expectation, duty and authenticity, family loyalty and personal identity. The truth is, saving my relationship with my father didn't require learning to love him more. I'd always loved him. It required learning to be myself in relationship with him, to refuse to inherit his dreams in favor of building my own, to respect him without becoming him. Today, when other sons ask me about family relationships, I tell them this. Stop trying to be the son your father imagined. Start being the son you actually are. Stop inheriting his dreams to manage his emotions. Start building your own dreams while maintaining connection. Because here's what I learned. Being a good son isn't about becoming your father's clone. It's about becoming the best version of yourself while honoring the love that raised you. And that transformation benefits everyone. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, please know this. You can honor your father without sacrificing yourself. You can be a good son while pursuing your own path. The fathers who truly love you want you to be successful and fulfilled, even if it looks different from what they imagined. The research is clear, the path is proven, and the transformation is possible. You just have to be brave enough to stop inheriting someone else's life and start building your own. Trust me, authenticity feels so much better than performance.